Well, good morning, folks. It is Tuesday, October 28th. I try not to say good morning when I start these videos because I know you watch them kind of throughout the day, maybe even to the evening, sometimes the day after. But I'm going to make a point to, note at the recording of this video, it is the morning. It's kind of between 5 and 6 a.m. here Central Time. And this is the image that I'm staring at here as I'm waking up. It's Category 5 Hurricane Melissa. At this point, one of the strongest hurricanes that's ever formed on record in the Atlantic Basin. And unfortunately, as you can tell, just looking at its central position there, now here this morning making its final approach to Jamaica, where it will make landfall today. A historic, almost certainly devastating, catastrophic landfall is one of the strongest storms on record to make landfall in the Atlantic. We're looking at it here on infrared satellite view, not quite the sunrise up here this morning. I'll switch and see how close we are in the next view. But even on infrared, the storm is menacing. It has an almost symmetrical, perfect circular eye. The cloud tops that are above that eye wall, that central dense overcast as we call it, that too is almost annular is what we call it, almost a perfect circle as well. This is, you could say meteorological perfection, and this is just a perfect storm, and that is very, very bad, likely tragic news for Jamaica, where tropical storm force, even hurricane conditions are now here this morning already starting to impact the island. Those will be followed by catastrophic storm surge associated with this. The minimum central pressure at last reading, I think, was down to 901 or 903 millibars. It's close, right between the two. So again, that puts it stronger than Katrina, puts it kind of maybe in the top 7, top 8 camp of all the storms in the history of the Atlantic Basin. You can see those there. Wilma first, Gilbert from 88 is second, at least with respect to that minimum central pressure. And yeah, 901 millibars now for Melissa. Maximum wind speeds right now 175 miles an hour sustained. The gusts will likely exceed that. So you're talking about potentially up toward 200 mile an hour gusts. That is complete structural failure along the coast for a number of buildings, unfortunately. And it's just sobering to think about, staring at this image this morning, what the island and the communities in Jamaica are going to go through today, particularly near the eye wall. The conditions will be hellacious, unsurvivable in some cases, where the storm surge is coupled with those 180 mile an hour winds, and then likely power outages and blinding rain and all that comes with these storms. It isn't going to be done with Jamaica. Jamaica is pretty mountainous region. Unfortunately, that will also influence what is likely to be a catastrophic flooding event associated with the storm that has really already begun. Unfortunately, a number of impacts have already occurred because of that. There's more of that coming today. But after it passes Jamaica, it'll likely weaken but retain a major hurricane strength where it makes landfall in far eastern Cuba. Again, Cuba has mountains as well, and those will exacerbate that rainfall threat. And there'll be a storm surge component in eastern Cuba. So while it makes landfall there, it won't be as strong as it was in Jamaica, but it'll still be a very, very significant hurricane, likely to weaken further but retain hurricane status after that, where it will impact the Bahamas. And anywhere in red here, hurricane warnings are posted, obviously Jamaica, but into Cuba and into Bahamas as well. And I will make a note, if I sound a little bit different this morning, I apologize. I'm a bit under the weather here, but still wanted to touch on Melissa, unfortunately, here. We were worried about Melissa kind of early on. We mentioned a week or two ago that it was going to get into the Caribbean, where storms kind of waffle back and forth whether they're going to accelerate from there or not. But the basin conditions down there were extremely warm. And what I mean by that, just those very warm sea surface temperatures, even under the sea surface, we kind of look that first few hundred feet down to see, as the wind and the waves stir up some of that water, is there enough heat below the exact surface of the ocean to keep the hurricane spinning? And there was a tremendous amount of that ocean heat content underneath where Melissa is now, southwest Jamaica. And so again, we're looking at this on water vapor now. It was noted that Melissa has one of the driest eyes. It kind of sounds silly to say, but the actual eye of the storm here is, that clear central, almost like oasis-like eye is very dry on water vapor satellite. So this is typically a satellite product that we look at to capture, like shortwave troughs over Montana, showing you those like developing nor'easters over the eastern U.S. We're looking at it right now with Hurricane Melissa, and obviously very moist in that eye wall. But the air in the eye of Melissa is actually sinking. The air in the eye of these storms, so it's increasing or rising very rapidly just in that eye wall or in the outside rain bands. But inside the eye wall, the air is actually returning back down toward the ground. That compresses the air, it dries it, and you can see that juxtaposition with how dry the center of the storm is, and then how moist, at least on the satellite return, the eye wall is. Another indication that this is an extremely strong upper end storm at this point. Visible satellite view yesterday. I'm going to post this one. This one is from Dakota Smith. Excellent Twitter follow here of the storm before sunset yesterday. And you can see even from visible, you had that almost atmospheric like perfection to it. Just perfect circle spinning vigorously there. And at one point you can see some little wobbles in the eye wall. These very, very strong storms with those high winds. Sometimes the actual circulation can be disrupted a little bit by mesovortex or something or another. There's one right there. And the eye will actually wobble around a little bit, just kind of a curious feature that we see with some of these strongest storms. If we back up and look big picture across the Western Hemisphere, the Northern Western Hemisphere, it is still the most obvious feature on the map here. Again, a sobering sight as one of the strongest hurricanes you'll ever see in the Atlantic here this morning makes its last approach to Jamaica here, unfortunately. If we look at the surface winds, obviously Melissa stands out, but we're starting to peel back. I'm going to turn the conversation a little bit more toward North America here, where we have a potentially developing coastal low. This has been was on our mind a little bit earlier as a potential nor'easter, but that forecast has some nuance to it now as another low is going to try to develop kind of along the Appalachians, which is going to disrupt that process just a bit, which has changed the forecast a bit for New England over the last few days. We have another low here over Texas that's going to be consolidating as it moves across the Gulf Coast states, bringing rainfall there. And then the last thing I'll kind of mention here is we do have to thank our cold Halloween forecast at this point, particularly if you're in the south or in the central part of the country, and certainly along the Gulf Coast states, but even over toward like Georgia, South Carolina, and up into New England, that the cold Halloween that is likely to be experienced anywhere from like Kansas, Illinois, and south toward the Gulf Coast states, with temperatures into the overnight, the overnight lows into the 40s all the way almost through the Gulf Coast itself. Obviously not quite that cold when we're talking about like Halloween Eve, the actual trick-or-treating time, but still likely to be chillied, remembered as one of a cooler Halloween in a lot of these states here. But it's the trough that's associated with that cool down, and I'll show that here. This forecast for those 500 millibar ECMWF anomalies. We'll post this at like 7 p.m., right? Trick-or-treating time. It's this trough that's actually going to help usher Melissa out to sea and away from the continental U.S. So I'll play that backwards. Let's get it to present day here. Here's Tuesday, 7 a.m. There's, unfortunately, Melissa right over Jamaica, as is expected over the next few hours. But this trough here, you can see this ridge over Ontario, and this trough here, I'll play this forward. As Melissa crosses Cuba, this deep trough, we'll talk about the rainfall that's going to be associated with this over the next 48 hours across the Gulf Coast states, as we mentioned. But this is going to punch Melissa. You see that punching it east, keeping it out to sea. It could make a turn back as a remnant system back toward maritime Canada, but it's that deep trough barreling through the south, which prevents Melissa from getting back up into the Gulf. We talked about that scenario, a week or two ago, but that quickly fell off as a potential option when that trough came in. So if you're in those Gulf Coast states and you are, upset about that cool Halloween, we can at least thank that pattern for keeping this historic storm away from the United States here. Look at the radar presentation here this morning. Some showers over the Carolinas, mid-Atlantic, all the way toward West Virginia. There's an arc of showers and convection now through eastern Oklahoma, and then again those broad kind of weak showers up through the northern plains along the Missouri River Valley, up through the Red River of the North, much of Minnesota. Seeing some of those morning showers here today. This is kind of what this next system, which is going to give a kick to the low that's currently developing here over the mid-south, and that's going to be peeling through here. That's going to meet up that trough that we talked about with this coastal low that's trying to develop. We saw that on those surface winds and bring a broad low up into New England. But it's going to do that a little bit west as we originally expected, which is going to change some of the impacts here to New England. We'll look at that in a sec. Here's on infrared. You can see that developing coastal low here has almost what we call this baroclinic leaf, which typically is associated with these kind of developing lows. It kind of looks like a leaf if you see this feature here that would like be attached to a stem. That's what we call a baroclinic leaf. Tends to be out ahead of some of these developing lows. There's the water vapor. Again, this is the water vapor loop we typically look at to kind of identify some of these features, but we saw it on Melissa earlier. Jump over and look at the 7 a.m. I'm starting with the GFS here. Our ECMWF, apologize. We are missing the morning run here, but hopefully to get that one in soon here as we work through that little error. But looking at the GFS, you can see those showers here over the northern plains that we talked about, the showers over North Carolina that attempt to develop that coastal low. So play this forecast forward. We go through the day today. You notice that rain kind of consolidating near Memphis. As this low pressure system develops, rainfall through Iowa, all the way into Missouri, portions of Illinois, Arkansas, Mississippi. That starts to bend south as that piece came in behind it, helping to kind of punch it further to the south. Again, that central low near Memphis tomorrow. This is the afternoon, with rain spreading across the Ohio and Tennessee valleys, even toward the Gulf Coast. Take that forecast forward. You notice some of this area missing out on that rainfall here. And that coastal low that we talked about, so that first attempt developed and then raced east in front of that trough. So not seeing that big kind of coastal low develop into that nor'easter that we were worried about earlier. By Thursday, we have that kind of second attempt. And at this point, Melissa and this one, they're not working together. They're kind of pulling a coherent low away from one another. So while Melissa kind of swings up this way, we have a weaker low almost inland here trying to develop over like Pennsylvania and New England. See another attempt to develop a coastal low here. Likely a wet, gusty weekend for New England over toward like Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Cape Cod with some heavier winds, but not the kind of big wind event that we were maybe worried about, late last week and through this area. There will be wind associated with this, but won't be that kind of traditional big nor'easter. But nonetheless, quite a bit of rainfall on the way. And then luckily, Melissa's staying out to sea, maybe a closer passage toward maritime Canada. We're definitely getting into a calmer pattern after that as we take it through the weekend. Not much to talk about in terms of precip. Some shower chances there across the Pacific Northwest. Could see a coastal low develop. We've seen a few of the models catch on this. The ECMWF has it as well, that late next weekend, even like early Monday, we see some rainfall getting into these states here that missed out. Maybe those better rainfall chances with this initial low this week and taking all the way out, beyond a week here at this point. That developing up the New England coastline with a lot of the systems coming across the northern tier of the country. I'm going to play this forecast forward. We're way out now. Saw another low come through here, but not the the busiest precipitation forecast that we've seen, especially if you're outside of kind of the far eastern U.S. or the Pacific Northwest. I'm going to jump back. We're going to jump over to the GFS. Let's see if the ECMWF AIFS is in here. Yeah, there we go. That's the latest one. I'm going to show you the precip anomalies. If I show you the next 7 days, you can see that rainfall that we were just talking about across Minnesota and Iowa as that low swings through here, through the Gulf Coast states, and then the mid-Atlantic up into New England, those heavier rain values there. But dry over portions of the Midwest, dry over the western U.S., wet for the Pacific Northwest. This is kind of a pattern that we talked about in early November. But if we take the 4 to 10 day precip anomaly, so we exclude that initial low that we talked about moving through this week, that little coastal low, it's also there in the AIFS for the Gulf Coast states this weekend. Aside from that, and those little rain chances I talked about for the Pacific Northwest, dry for much of the lower 48 through this weekend and into early next week. Now, we push the forecast out a little bit beyond that, and there's this sign that November could be more active across the northern tier. So flow coming in like this, and then diving down like that, or through New England. So I was curious that, remember that pattern that I'm showing here from the 8 to 14 day from the AIFS? That this could be a pattern that lingers not only through November 5th through the 11th, which is where this forecast is here, but potentially beyond that, some of these models come to fruition. That's going to be a little bit of a change of pace. So if we just looking at the month of October here, October 1st through the 25th, at the pattern that we had been dealing with really over the last kind of 3 to 4 weeks. And we had a lack of momentum. So we had these kind of big ridges, one here over Ontario and Quebec. See that one here? We had these cutoff lows over the west. That kept California wet with all the activity that we talked about getting into portions of Southern California through San Francisco, the Central Valley, some of those early Sierra snowfalls. But we were, lacking flow over much of the eastern continental U.S., like the eastern 2/3. We had drought building into this area here, in some cases all the way toward the Gulf Coast, into the Carolinas, through the Midwest. But as we've added some flow back, we've had more of these systems. We have one coming through here today. We've started to work back some of that drought concern. Now, as we take the forecast forward, this pattern changes in that while we have more flow, play this forecast out through Wednesday. There's that deep trough that we talked about. We're thanking it for keeping Melissa to the east. The southwest staying warm, particularly early this week, but even lasting later on. That little system coming through the Pacific Northwest here. Play this forecast forward. I mean, this is now Friday. This is the Halloween forecast. Cool across the eastern U.S., chilly Halloween for the Gulf Coast states. But again, we have to thank this pattern not only from Melissa, but it's helping to flip the pattern around. I mean, think about the difference between ridging here of the east, troughing in the west. Now we have ridging over the western U.S., troughing in the over the eastern U.S. and Ontario, and that momentum, plenty of it still coming out of the Pacific, this deep trough over the Gulf of Alaska, the jet stream just screaming through here into British Columbia. So we take a double look back at those temperatures here. I'm going to do, this is now the maximum temperature forecast, cooler today under the influence of that trough. Of course, a lot of the continental U.S. warm over the west, warm in South Texas, but switching cooler across the southern U.S. tomorrow on Wednesday as that trough settles in. That rain over the Gulf Coast states, see much cooler maximum temperatures there. Much warmer in Southern California tomorrow. So Wednesday, we actually have heat advisories posted for some areas here. We have freeze watches for the southern high plains, like the panhandle of Texas, western Oklahoma. Look at how warm we are in California. I mean, even up into the 90s in the Inland Empire, down up to like almost 80 in San Francisco. Very warm for this time of year. Again, prompting that heat advisories. That cool air extends east along Halloween. There's your maximum temperatures. So certainly not going to be any warmer than this as we start trick-or-treating in the evening. It's staying warm in the western U.S. here this weekend, so like kind of flip of the pattern where we're warm west and cool east. And this lasts through Saturday and then into Monday. I do want to jump back and show the minimum temperatures here. So we're talking about that freeze threat. Take the forecast tomorrow morning, Wednesday, so along the high plains, all the way from Amarillo, likely south of there and west of there. Western Nebraska, portions of Kansas, looking at a widespread freeze event. And this corridor here can see some other freezing temperatures here, but no major risk to the south right now. Taking into Thursday and Friday, again, that freezing line staying kind of over here or even up here into the Midwest, not getting down into those kind of Ohio River Valley or Tennessee Valley areas. Take it through Saturday, and then Monday, we start to warm up behind that, certainly in the western U.S., but coming over to the central U.S. as well. Now, looking in the long range, Eric talked about this yesterday. We do see some alignments, I think, heading toward November. I think we have a narrative here, at least through the middle part of the month. There is this decent consensus now that the MJO is moving into phase 6. We talked about the implications of that. I'm going to entertain the possibility that moves kind of all the way into phase 7 at this point. Not all the models are taking it there. The spaghetti plot here from the ECMWF extended model has a number of different scenarios. Now, the operational run does take it by the middle to end of the month through phase 7. Some of these other ensemble members do as well. And it's not uncommon when we have these transitions from phase 4, the 5 to 6, that we wind up all the way in 7. With La Nina, the chance that we kind of make this transition all the way through 7 and 8 is sometimes reduced as a likelihood because the trade winds kind of keep the MJO more so over here. But if I at least entertain the possibility of it heading all the way toward phase 7 and we pull that up for the middle of November, we keep the ridging out west, at least climatologically. We keep a lot of flow across the northern portion of the country, so like through the Pacific Northwest, which would likely stay active, through the northern plains, through the Midwest, and potentially some sort of low developing over New England. That's not dissimilar from the forecast that we have now over the next kind of 7 through 14 days. Kind of curiously, if we look week 3 to 4 from that temperature outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, I can see some of that just in the flow here from their temperature outlook. If we look at precip comparatively, a lot of the flow across the northern portion of the country wet in the northwest, wet across the northern portions of the Great Lakes into Maine, and dry to the south. And this kind of keeps us a little bit concerned about this area here because if I just jump back, that's not what I meant to do, and go to the last, let's do like 60 days of rainfall. I mean, the driest part of the country, you'd have to argue, would be the Carolinas and the Southeast. So the fact that we're trending that area is going to continue to stay dry is a concern because our seasonal forecast for this corridor is that drought is going to expand across the southern U.S. and the southeast. So that remains a concern. Now, I do want to jump back and show you that 8 to 14 day spread from all the different models here. We should have all of these in. And again, you can kind of see that flow across the north like that, and all of these 8 to 14 day GFS ensemble, even a little bit dry for this area here, at least comparatively, with that potential coastal low, maybe some system coming out of Caribbean we'll have to keep an eye on. But that's the general pattern setup. Drier in the southern plains, getting over into the Midwest proper, and toward the Ohio River Valley, but certainly dry in this corridor here. Now, if we look at the ECMWF extended model, Eric showed this yesterday. I mean, it's dry in that same area. This takes us all the way through the month of November. So we still see that pattern here. Now, how does this marry up with that tropical northern hemisphere teleconnection that we talked about earlier? So we had this kind of conversation where there were some similarities between this year and last year. And last year we saw a lot of these kind of Hudson Bay troughs bringing lake effect snow in, bringing these deep shots of cold air to the Gulf Coast. And we were a little bit warmer out west. But in these kind of major tropical northern hemisphere winters, that pattern holds even more so. We have much seasonal to colder winters in this corridor here. So in some cases, more snowfall for the Great Lakes corridor, the lake effect snow, and the west stays drier, unfortunately, in that pattern. Now, if we look all the way out there, I'll start. This is the ECMWF 500 millibar height anomaly extended, so it's going to take us way out there. Current pattern, there's that trough over the east ridge of the west, bringing the warmer temperatures. So I take that forecast forward through like the end of November. Well, we actually have some support for ridging here over the eastern U.S. It's not much, maybe a little bit of troughing, or maybe trying to show something of a slight pattern change late in the month. Now, if I do take the forecast even further, we start to maybe see at the beginning of December, where we're going to watch for that TNH pattern, some support setting up in the ECMWF extended. Now, I have to point out, I'm showing you a day 39 through 46 forecast. I can't put much confidence in this, but it is something that we are watching, and we're going to continue to watch it over the next 2 weeks. We want to see, is that the dominant December pattern that shows up? Because when it does, shows up early in the year, we look at some of those sea surface temperature similarities between this year and those other TNH, positive TNH years, which are dry west, more wintry in the east. Maybe even for New England, they sometimes show up even in December. So it's something we're keeping a close eye on. Now, as far as other things we're keeping an eye on, certainly the attention has to turn back as I finish this up here toward the Caribbean and Jamaica. Again, by the time this video is kind of uploaded and recorded and most folks start watching it, the impacts will have begun in a catastrophic way in Jamaica. The National Hurricane Center putting up very sobering messaging and language here this morning. Catastrophic flash flooding, landslides, and destructive winds will continue through today, causing widespread infrastructure damage, power and communication outage in isolated communities. So our thoughts and prayers are with Jamaica as they face this historic landfall of Melissa here today. That's it for today. Eric will talk with you tomorrow on Wednesday. Thanks for watching.